The information contained in this video is strictly for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or other professional advice and is not a substitute for consultation with a qualified professional. The opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect the views of the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and the City University of New York. State of Mind is a web-based discussion program that explores the relevant social, economic, and political issues that are prominent at the post-secondary level of education. State of Mind is sponsored by the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. BMCC. Start here, go anywhere. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna Nadella, and this is State of Mind. Wrapping up our Ranking the MBA Rankings series, today we're focusing on rankings by the Financial Times, the Economist, and Poets&Quants. Back with us to find a final time to help better understand the science behind them is John A. Byrne, CEO of Sea Change Media. John, thanks again for joining us.
A pleasure.
So we had just wrapped up Business Week in terms of talking about their place. As a recap, we had U.S. News at number 1.
Right.
Forbes at number 2, tied at 3, Business Week and the Financial Times, and then we had The Economist at 5. Right. So before we go into the Financial Times, we were speaking about fraud within the ranking space. Could you just take a second to follow up on that last point from our previous episode?
Yeah, you know, I mentioned the outright fraud at Tulane, and there have been some other schools that have been caught in scandal. You can assume that there have been some schools that have cheated but have never been caught and have never owned up to it.
Right.
But more importantly, there probably are subtle ways that schools can fudge data.
Okay.
Let me give you a really good example. If you are the head of career management and you want to know what your graduates made and how many of them have job offers at graduation 3 months later, which is the 2 key placement metrics, you send a survey out to everyone.
Right.
Of course, you have to do that. But not everyone responds. So how hard do you chase down the non-respondents? And do you chase down the non-respondents who have jobs or don't?
Right. I see where you're going with this.
And do you chase down the non-respondents who have jobs in private equity and hedge funds?
Right.
Or do you chase down the respondents in nonprofits?
Right.
Or those who took maybe a marketing job that pays $50,000 a year.
Or maybe went to a startup where they're not getting paid anything initially?
Yeah, because it's an equity package primarily, and it's all on the upside.
Okay.
So, that you can't determine.
Okay.
Now, schools are required to publish the percentage of people who respond in a given class, and you can look at that number, and if you see that it's below a certain level, meaning outside the norm, you can begin to question the data.
Okay.
And so there are ways to kind of look at that and get at that, but there's no way to tell, how aggressive a career management officer was in tracking down the people who are making the good money and not tracking down the people who didn't make the good money.
Right.
So there's that. And then I have had calls from admission officers who have told me that they are under great pressure from their deans to get the numbers higher, meaning, okay, do I take out underrepresented minorities because their GMATs are lower to get my overall GMAT up, and after all, they're only a small percentage of the class and they're not the mainstream.
Right.
And it goes on and on from there. So there's, fudging that you can't determine.
Right.
So you look at the numbers and you look at them and you kind of look at them the way they could be on a balance sheet or an income statement, frankly, because there are a lot of things that influence any financial number, right? You can have a high return on equity if you have a high level of debt, long-term debt.
That's correct.
And it may not very well mean a whole lot for the company if your debt is out of proportion in your industry with your competitors. To have a high ROE, it becomes a less meaningful measure. And there's a lot of similarities with the statistics that are collected and distributed on business schools.
Okay, got it. So taking the ranking and talking about the Financial Times, I think you had them tied with Business Week for 3rd place. one thing I want to ask specifically, FT actually provides 7 different rankings as relate to graduate level business education. Can you speak to the value of this approach, and is it actually a value add versus the other competitors we've spoken about?
Well, I mean, to the extent that there's, again, throwing more data into the field for people to look at and to help make decisions,
Sure.
that's valuable.
Okay.
I mean, they rank everything that moves, essentially,
Right.
and all that is an advertising play. You know, you publish a ranking, and then everyone who does, you know, specialized one-year MBA programs,
Right.
they advertise. You do an executive education ranking,
Right.
and then everyone who does executive education advertises. You do part-time MBA, executive MBA, then they advertise. So, I mean, people have to understand that's why these institutions are doing the rankings.
Got it.
To make money.
Okay.
That's all it's about.
Right.
They're not after some greater level of truth in the world, okay?
Fair enough. So talk to me about the specifics with Financial Times.
I said before, and I will repeat again, I like the FT ranking primarily because it's a true global ranking. All the schools in the world who are players in the field submit data to them, and they get ranked. The problem is it's a ranking that has a heavy bias against the American schools
Sure.
in particular, but more broadly the North American schools, including the Canadian schools.
Got it.
And that's by virtue of its methodology. So some of the things that the FT ranks, and they rank on more metrics than any other ranking,
Really?
are inconsequential to me and are no measurement of quality and are only there to bias the result. For example, how important is it for faculty to have passports from other countries? I don't think it's important. The truth is that most of the best faculty in the world, like it or not, have their PhDs from American institutions. Because business schools in America, it's an American invention, and it's one area of the world, like technology, where we truly and completely, totally have the lead.
Right.
So, you know, whether you're an international faculty member, how does that really matter? In fact, it may matter less because most MBA programs are taught in English. And if your English is so poor that half the kids in the class can't even understand what you're saying, I don't think it's a good thing. The number of international applicants, not applicants, enrolled students. The number of women who are enrolled, with the desired composition being 50-50 for gender, for example. I think these are arbitrary, politically correct stats that bear no relationship to the quality of a program. And in fact, by and large, you could make the statement, this is going to be controversial and provocative, but I'll make the statement. The higher the percentage of international students in a program, often makes me think of lower quality, not higher quality. The higher percentage of women, unfortunately, suggests a affirmative action policy and means that probably the overall quality of the student body is less than it could be. So those are bad measurements. They even measure the mobility of MBA candidates. So if the graduating class distributes itself all over the world, they get ranking points in the FT survey. I don't think that means anything to people who want a quality MBA experience. They survey alumni 3 years out, but they do things to the numbers that are jarring to me. The biggest and the most troublesome aspect of it all is they apply an adjustment to reported income. The adjustment is based on purchasing parity in a given economy. So what's the result of that? All the incomes reported by schools that are in emerging economies are vastly inflated, maybe by a factor of 5 times. So I'm going to take India, for example, where the compensation levels are relatively low. What they will do is apply this purchasing power parity multiplier, and the actual income that they'll report will be something like 4 to 5 times higher than it actually is. Now, does that distort the number? Of course it does. Does it make for unfair comparisons? Of course it does. Their argument is that in India, for the amount of money they're making, they're having this much purchasing power. What they're ignoring is the fact that high percentage of the population make little money, and many live in poverty, unfortunately.
Yep.
And the people that we're talking about are in a professional class who do not live in poverty and should not be compared to those who do for the purposes of inflating their compensation. So there are these adjustments that are made that kind of really screw up the analysis and screw up the reliability of the data. And there are schools that do not deserve their ranks by any measure at all.
Are you talking about the international schools with this?
Many of them, mostly international.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
And it's because of these metrics that are used.
Sure. But couldn't you make the argument that at least the Financial Times is trying to make an effort at it, as skewed as the approach they're taking is? Because you're right, U.S. News is not looking at international schools. Business Week is not looking at international schools. And we are getting more global as an economy, and the idea of leaving the United States to go study somewhere else abroad is actually, I think, a more plausible possibility in this day and age.
Oh yeah, no. It's not that's not a problem.
Okay.
I totally agree with you.
Right.
What the problem is when you build in a bias for the purposes of gaining advertising,
right,
and therefore distort a result. Here's what the FT should do. It should gather standardized statistics that truly measure quality, like U.S. News does.
Right.
I'd like to know, and I'd like the FT to compute the average GMAT, GPA, acceptance rates, salary and bonus at graduation, number of people with job offers at graduation and 3 months later. That's really good, hard data. And in fact, it doesn't exist as freely as it does in the U.S. for the international schools. Why? Because the FT isn't imposing the discipline on the collection of that data on those schools. Many of those schools actually refuse to report a lot of this data.
Is that right?
And they refuse to report it because it makes them look bad in comparison to the U.S. schools. Okay. So, and I'm talking about some of the best, the very best schools outside the United States are not reporting simple, basic data because it makes them look like, instead of ranking in the top 10 in the world, they rank really, behind the top 25 U.S. institutions.
I see.
And that's just ridiculous. And the FT could fix that. And that's real good data. That's not, oh, we're going to rank you on how many international members of your board of advisors for the school there are, or how many foreign passports your faculty has, or where your students go. If they go to multiple countries, we're going to give them a higher ranking than if they stay in a relatively few number of countries. The truth is that some of the cultural disparities and differences among and between some nations are equal to or less than the disparities and cultural differences in the United States between the South, the Northeast, the West Coast, and the Midwest.
Sure.
And yet, the U.S. would be counted, obviously, as all one country, when in many cases, the FT is literally giving credit to a European school that has to draw from other European countries, primarily because there aren't even enough people to draw from their own country. Why should they be getting ranking credit for that? What does that have to do with the quality of the education or the quality of the MBA experience? It has nothing to do with it at all.
So if advertising dollars is what's really driving the participation of international schools outside of the United States or outside of North America, is it fair to make the statement that, truthfully, they aren't that legitimately interested in rankings as a concept? It's only because of the incentivization that the FT is giving them to even participate at this rate?
Because of the obsession over rankings and how widely read they are, they become important whether you like it or not. And however screwed up the methodology is, they're still important. And I think, it just draws a lot of attention. And to the extent that it draws a lot of attention, it's drawing the attention of the people that they want to go to their schools. So it's important to them. Here's another thing that I really hate about the FT. And this is a very important point. The FT is intellectually dishonest.
Really?
Because it does not report the underlying score upon which the numerical rank is based. Let me put that in English for
Please,
everybody, okay? Every ranking, whether it's a number 1, number 3, number 5, is based on an underlying number. It's an index, right? So the number 1 school is going to be based on 100 points.
Right.
And the number 2 might be 98.6.
Right.
And on and on and on. And it's very important for an institution that ranks schools to give the readers those numbers. Because if you can see that the real difference between a school is one is 98.8 and one is 98.7, there's no real difference.
Right.
And yet it's 2 and 3. And it looks...
Because we have to give a ranking.
Exactly.
Right.
So for the FT not to report those underlying index numbers, to allow its readers to look at its ranking and say, okay, here's a meaningful result, and here's a result that is not meaningful at all, and therefore the rank shouldn't be considered meaningful to me, is intellectually dishonest.
Okay. Well, with that thought, let's move on to the Economist, the quirky ranking, as you like to call it. Yeah, I almost feel like we might not be spending too much time on it.
No, probably not.
Talk to me about the Economist ranking, and then tell me, should it even still be in existence?
No, I don't think. You know, I think also of the 5, it's the least influential, the least referred to, least read.
Really? Okay.
Because the results are so odd. And The Economist is a great publication, and it's a publication that's highbrow, upscale,
absolutely,
thoughtful. Known for its perspective and analysis. And in this area, it's offering a product that is totally mediocre. And it's largely because of the methodology and what it measures. And you know, I mentioned before, you know, how important is it that a school offers languages in a business school?
Right.
I mean, that might be more appropriate for an undergraduate ranking, but definitely not for an MBA program. And again, this goes back to what the FT does as well, measuring international and female composition. I want a high percentage of women in the classroom because they represent 50% of the world's population.
Right.
And many women, frankly, are ahead of many men and
That's
have much more to contribute than men.
Yeah.
And they should be there. But I don't want a measure that that is politically correct and imposes that. And neither do I want a measure that rewards a school for a higher percentage of international applicants. Of course, international representation in the class is extremely important.
Sure.
But it's not just international representation. It's the best of what the world offers, competing against the best of what any home country offers.
Got it.
And you don't get that in these rankings.
So let's play the game of hypothetical. You're now in charge of the Economist MBA rankings. Without trying to make them a cookie-cutter copy of US News or Business Week, how do you take their existing framework, if you can, and make it actual real value add?
Yeah. I wouldn't take their existing framework. I would throw it out and give a new framework for it.
Okay.
And I would just do something really simple. And this was suggested by the dean at the Columbia Business School recently. And after he suggested it, we actually tried to put it together.
Sure.
And it's simple inputs and outputs.
Okay.
You know, I mentioned in an earlier episode what I like most about US News, and then how US News screws it up with other surveys.
Right.
I would take inputs and outputs and create a ranking out of them. And I might value each slightly differently, but I would basically take GMATs, GPAs, and acceptance rates as the 3 inputs, and the 3 outputs being average salary and bonus, percentage of job offers at graduation and 3 months later, those 3. I'd put them all together and I'd create a ranking, and I think it would be clean, simple. People could look at each individual metric. Of course, the underlying index numbers would be available for everyone to see as well. And I think, and it would be done worldwide, not domestically as it's done by US News, so you'd have that additional component, and you'd have real hard school reported data, which is much better than the data that the FT is using, because they don't use that data.
Right.
And you'd have something completely differentiated. You'd have something that would be global and something that people could pick apart. Right. Because the other important thing, actually, instead of looking at rankings overall, what people need to do is look at the components, what the components of the rankings tell them.
Right.
And you would have no bias or cheerleading results from alumni or students. No flawed, peer assessment kind of thing.
You're almost taking the human element out of it.
It's just clean. Yeah. It's clean. And the only way it's not clean is where the fudging occurs by schools, which you really can't do too much about anyway.
And again, assuming that there's a little fudging on every school, that kind of cancels itself out.
Yes.
All right. So that actually is a nice segue, if we're going to move on from The Economist, is to Poets and Quants.
Sure.
Now, I'm aware of Poets and Quants. Many of my brethren in the world of business are aware of Poets and Quants, but maybe take a second, talk about what originated the concept, why you thought you wanted to go out on your own and leave Business Week, and tell us what the differentiators and the value propositions of Poets and Quants ranking is.
Sure. Well, I saw that at Business Week, the coverage of business schools was getting diminished, and for a lot of different reasons, in part because of change in editorial viewpoints.
Sure.
And so, and I knew how valuable this market is and how important it is. The MBA degree is the most popular graduate degree granted in America, and has been for the last 5 years. Business majors are the most popular majors in undergraduate institutions. They account for 1 out of every 4 majors. The people who graduate from these schools are the best and brightest that we have to offer. They are our future leaders, not only in the corporate sector, but increasingly in the social mission and social enterprise areas. So, and yet, because of all the disparities among the rankings, the diminished coverage in Business Week, I thought there was a great opportunity here to just dig deep and be in the weeds and write for the reader, the demographic, the people who are trying to make this very important decision in their life. Absolutely. And aim at the top end of the market, too, because this is such a big and important decision for people, and they should have access to as much information and as much analysis as they can to help them make it. And the problem with all the traditional media is this: journalists write what they want to write; they don't write what their audience needs. It's a very selfish business, to be honest, and I've been in it all my life, and I can just tell you, you don't write stories for your audience. You don't even think about your audience, and you really have met your audience or made any attempt to talk to them. What you write are stories that make you feel good with your colleagues. And the more you can write a gotcha story and get a pat on the back from your cubicle mate, the more likely you are to do it, and that's the incentive in journalism. The incentive in journalism is not to write for the audience, and that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to think about, what does the applicant need to know? What's important to make them be able to make a more informed decision that's going to affect their lives in a transformative way? And so that's what we do at Poets and Quants. The other little thing about this is, if you're the Business Week, you don't write about the FT ranking. You don't write about the Economist ranking. Why? You don't want to give
any free
your
publicity.
competitors publicity.
Of course.
Well, therefore, all the rankings go unexamined. And more than that, even your own ranking you don't want to report. Why? Well, if you're a journalist, you're doing this list, but you consider list journalism beneath you.
Really?
On some level, this is true. And so, therefore, you don't even report who went up the most, who went down the most, why they went up or down, what the flaws are in your own methodology, how it compares to others. So your report on your own ranking is mediocre at best. And, of course, there is no mention ever of a competitor. Because you don't want to give them publicity. So that allows Poets and Quants to have a really rich, vivid area of analytical coverage of something that's very important to a lot of people, which we do.
So talk to me about your rankings, and specifically the secret sauce, so to speak.
The secret sauce is, we believe that there is no truth in any one ranking, and from any year-to-year ranking, there are anomalies that appear that make no sense. And this is true whenever you're dealing with a lot of statistics. But I think that when you combine all 5, which do lead to image and reputation of a given business school over time, you have something. So what we decided to do is rather than collect more data or rather than do something that would overlap with what other people do, we would take all 5 rankings, weight them very much in the same way I rank the rankings for you.
Yeah.
Mush them together.
I see.
And create an Uber ranking.
Okay.
Okay? And that's what we did. And here, the beauty of the ranking is this. In one place, you can see where all the schools rank on all 5 measures. You can see where they're completely out of whack. You know, generally, consensus gives you a head start on truth.
Right.
Where the schools tend to be across the 5 different rankings is pretty much where they really tend to be and should be.
Right.
And when you see a wacky result, like a school being number 1, when in every other survey it's 12 or 14, you know you can discount or dismiss the number 1 ranking. So what it does is it diminishes the anomalies and the odd results and gives greater truth to where there's consensus or commonality. And so, and then again, you don't have to go to any individual ranking. You, in one spot, you can see where they all fall and then where this greater truth lies. And I think there's tremendous value in that.
So you take basically a statistical approach to rankings that don't necessarily have that statistical approach within them as well.
That's true.
So
now, you can't take 5 flawed rankings and create a perfect ranking. You got to understand, there's no perfect way. To do any of this.
You're making my job easy here. So talk to me about what keeps you up at night about your rankings that you'd love to fix, if there's anything at all.
Nothing.
Nothing. Because it's based off the rankings themselves.
Yeah.
But some of these proposals you've given over our last 3 episodes about how you can make certain rankings better, how you could be more metrics approached. Has Poets and Quants ever thought about getting the data themselves?
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that we're probably going to do that. I think where it really has value is with the non-U.S. schools. And I think an increasing number of people are looking at the broader landscape because a lot of the schools outside North America have become very good. And they're terrific places. And not only because maybe you want to work in a European or Asian country, or you want a better alumni network in Singapore or something like this. They've really become great institutions.
So how
and they deserve to be measured on a more logical and more reasonable way than the way they're currently measured. And I think we could do that by doing simple input and output.
So how do you get that information from these international schools when you said the very issue the Financial Times has is it's about advertising dollars more than it is about actually doing the right work behind the scenes?
Yeah. You basically have to say, hey, I want you to fill this survey out, and I want you to fill it out in a standardized format, and you have to see what you get. And here's what has to happen. Some schools will give you the data, and some schools won't. And when a school doesn't give you the data, you have to estimate the data. How do you estimate data? You talk to all the competitors off the record, and you literally get the data. Or you speak to admissions officers who are no longer at the school, and you get the data from them, and then you draw an intelligent estimate. So therefore, you never allow a school off the hook. If they don't want to give you the data, fine. I'll make the data up by reporting. And therefore, you will pay a penalty for that.
So,
because I could be wrong.
1, I look forward to this. I look forward to you eventually getting to that model. And 2, our final question, and as objectively as you can, John, as objectively, we ranked the 5 rankings. Where would Poets and Quants rank in there?
Oh, God.
You have to give us an answer. I think
we wouldn't rank first, but I'm going to tell you why. It's mainly service to the business community. You know, I think U.S. News provides the greatest service by accumulating standardized data that can be comparable across the universe of schools. That is a massive service. We don't go out and actually get any kind of data, proprietary or otherwise. We're taking that composite look. And I think that there's tremendous value in that, but for the applicant, but overall for the sense of the community and its competition and creating a market where a marketplace otherwise would not exist, it's U.S. News. There's one other thing I got to just say.
Please.
people have a love and hate relationship with rankings.
True.
The schools hate the rankings. The faculty hates the rankings.
Right.
Alumni who aren't ranked, whose schools aren't ranked,
They hate the rankings.
Hate the rankings.
Right.
Here's the real truth about rankings. Rankings have increased the mind share of the value of business education to such a degree that they've made this degree even more valuable than it otherwise would be.
Good point.
All the ink and all the digitized information that is spent on these rankings and all the coverage that goes around them have created mind share that's been incredibly important for the growth of the business of business education.
Right.
And without it, business schools wouldn't be nearly as institutions that we know them to be today.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you so much, John. This has been an absolute pleasure spending the last hour and a half with you. We look forward to having you again, and we look forward to hearing from you in about a year's time. So thank you.
Thanks.
On that note, that will wrap up our show for today. If you like what you saw on any episode within the MBA Rankings series, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any comments or questions for myself, please feel free to reach out by email or Twitter. And if you would like to keep up to date on the ongoings of State of Mind, check out our website at www.bmcc.cuny.edu. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.